Well, Sergey Lavrov is in New York to chair meetings at the United Nations Security Council and for talks on the renewal of the grain deal. He is addressing the press at the conclusion of his visit, so let's take you live to New York for that briefing.
In the United States, they exist in Britain and in France. There are dozens of them, and many of them have for many years worked directly on our borders, including inside Ukraine. And this also gives rise to significant questions. Now, with respect to what's happening in Sudan, I think that certainly this is a tragedy. People are dying. There are threats to diplomats, and they are significant threats. We are aware of this. We are following the situation. Today, representatives of UNICEF have requested our embassy to somehow host and accommodate their staff because of the fact that they are not in a safe location. I'm not certain how this can be done, but we will tackle the situation. Let us recall the developments with Sudanese statehood first in the singular, and then Sudan and South Sudan. And this was all transpiring before our very eyes when our U.S. colleagues made one of their foreign policy priorities the division of Sudan into two parts. They turned to us for the then President Omar al-Bashir, for us to persuade Mr. Bashir to reach an agreement for the conduct of free elections on voluntary separation and division. And we, frankly speaking, thought that the Sudanese people, the peoples, should make that decision. And ultimately, the division took place. It was separated into two parts. A South Sudan was created, and the Americans, as the initiators of this divorce, so to speak, should have done everything possible to help these new two states coexist, to develop their economies, to provide for the welfare of their citizens. But the Americans didn't like something. I won't delve into the details, but they imposed sanctions both against the leadership of Sudan and against the leadership of South Sudan. And subsequently, there were constant demands being put forward through the IMF, International Monetary Fund, and so on. So this is a form of geopolitical engineering, and it doesn't bring about any positive results. I would propose that the main conclusion be drawn from this crisis: let's not interfere in Africans' negotiations amongst themselves. Let's not seek to resolve our own African issues, and let's not add any demands from abroad which fail to reflect the interests of those countries. African solutions to African problems.
Thank you, Minister Lavrov. Michelle Nichols from Reuters, thank you so much for the briefing. I just wanted to ask you a little bit further about the Ukraine grain deal and whether Russia has a response yet to the letter that the Secretary General has sent to President Putin suggesting a way forward for the extension and expansion of this Ukraine grain deal. And China is the biggest recipient of the Ukraine grain under that deal. So has China asked Russia to extend the deal?
Well, on China, I will say right away that we haven't been discussing this issue with our partners from the People's Republic of China, including probably for purely pragmatical considerations, given that with the People's Republic of China, we have a shared border across which there's export and import going on, and the Black Sea space is not at all necessary for China to procure our grain and grain in general from other countries that are adjacent to the Russian Federation, Kazakhstan, for example. As for the letter that the Secretary General conveyed to President Putin, I hope that it didn't leak, because this is personal correspondence between the leadership of the United Nations and the leadership and the leader of the UN and a leader of UN member states. If this paper was, if this correspondence was disclosed, that would not be very appropriate. This would be reflective of another attempt to exert pressure on a situation, and this is not acceptable, and that a situation that has not been resolved, and this is brought to a dead end by Western colleagues. I would recall 22 July of last year, this Black Sea Initiative was agreed upon, it was signed, and the text explicitly stated that this pertains to the export of grain and ammonia. And nobody recalled ammonia before the day before yesterday. Even though yesterday Antonio Guterres told me that on the global markets there are acute shortages of fertilizer, specifically from the ammonia group. Nobody thought about this up until very recently, the last moment. And the way that this deal quickly transformed from the Black Sea Initiative to the Black Sea Grain Initiative, from a humanitarian initiative, it transformed into a commercial initiative.
All right, we're coming out of that news conference happening now with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov, and one of the points he was really keen to make was this idea of non-interference in African affairs, not to interfere, African solutions for African problems. If we are able to establish that link again, we will go back there.